Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video, and in this video, for the 1 year anniversary of this channel, I decided to do a very requested video, and also a video that probably one of the longest ones I still plan on doing on here, and that is my runner-up rankings for Survivor. And the way I'm defining runner-up for this video is essentially just anyone that made it to Final Tribal Council. So considering at this point there are 39 finished seasons and there are a majority of seasons that have final threes, that leaves us with 63 people to rank here. And also the reason why I'm doing everyone that made the Final Tribal Council is just because, to be honest, at that point it's kind of arbitrary to just exclude it to only second place finishers, especially when you have like people like Tasha and Spencer who are tied for second place, or Cassandra and Dreams and stuff. It's a very arbitrary concept. So why not just go for everyone that's made the Final Tribal Council? As to be honest, their games can be ranked accordingly, as they all obviously made the Final Tribal Council. They all didn't get enough jury votes to win the game. So I do think it's still fair to rank these people within one list. I guess I should talk about my process first. And the runner-up rankings here were really tough. There were a lot of people that I just didn't really know what to do with. I had to really think about this for a while. So what I ended up doing to make things easier for me is I took my original winner rankings, the winner rankings I did on this channel, I split them up into tiers, obviously top, middle, bottom, and then also a top, middle, bottom within those tiers, and then associate traits within those tiers, and then associate a trait that I thought defined that tier, whether that be like complete dominance or second in command or under the radar, that sort of thing. And then after that, I went through the runners up and put them into these individual tiers. Then afterwards, obviously rank them accordingly. So essentially how this list is going to play out is that for the most part, these runner-ups are ranked in how I personally would rank them if they had won the game. There may be some exceptions and some like really haziness between like should this person be in this tier or not, but this is the way that I decided to rank them. So let's just jump right into it. So we're starting off with number 63, obviously starting it with that bottom tier that I was talking about, the bottom of the bottom tier. And essentially, I considered these clueless players that I don't think had really any control in how the game played out. I don't think they knew how the game was even being played. Number 63 here, we have Lillian Morris from Survivor Pearl Island. And for me, she's the worst runner-up because she was voted out. She was voted out and she came back into the game. And that's the main reason she's at the very bottom. If it wasn't for that, she would probably be ranked in my messy, aggressive tier, which is a bit later, kind of probably similar to where Sugar Kuiper is. Because she was voted out, I think that automatically places her at the bottom. Again, kind of a similar situation to with Chris Underwood. Though obviously she was in the game for longer, but I also feel like she was never someone that was actually going to win the game. Even though she did control some votes, that was mostly due to people perceiving her as a GOAT and wanting to drag her to the end. So Lil's at the very bottom here. At number 62, I have Kelly Wigglesworth. And she wasn't completely clueless winning the game. She was someone that was in the majority for, like, I would say the first, like, what, 2/3 of the game. She was obviously in that Toggy alliance with Rich, Rudy, and Sue. She was also in an alliance with Stacy at the very beginning of the game. But the reason why she's so low on my list here is because she had to win out. She essentially had to win those final 4 immunity challenges to get to the end. If not, she would have been taken out at every single opportunity. And for me, that's a very flawed game. I kind of associate her game as, like, maybe a slightly better version of Bob and Fabio's, probably in line with someone like a Jenna Maraska, which all fall into this tier. So for me, Kelly Wigglesworth is here at number 62. At number 61, I have someone that I think is just barely better, not even really, but we have Kim Johnson. Another person that had to win out at the end, had to win those final 2 immunity challenges, and I think she's someone that had no real shot of winning, but was in the majority for more of the game than Kelly Wigglesworth. And while she does get very lucky at the final 4 immunity challenge, and obviously her having to win both immunities is a very bad sign for her game, especially considering she doesn't win against anybody. So for her not to win against anybody, and also no one wants to take her to the end, that is very bad. So I did actually consider putting her below Kelly Wigglesworth, but again, I just feel like she was in the majority for more of the game than Kelly, so she ranks here at number 61. Now at number 60, we have the first person that I actually would have voted for in Final Tribal Council, but we have Matthew Von Ertfeldt at number 60, and I've said this before, I would have voted for him over Jenna. I think he was in a better position in that end game. I think he's someone that didn't threaten to quit. He wasn't someone that needed immunities, so I personally would have voted for him over Jenna, but that doesn't mean that he ranks well. He's not a good player. He was completely clueless for the entire pre-merge section of the game, only being clued in at the last second by Rob, and even that follows to the early post-merge as well. where, like, yeah, he voted in the majority, but it's like that's because, like, Rob told him what to do. I do think he grows some backbone towards the end of the game where he decides to throw final immunity in the hopes that Rob goes home, which obviously ends up working. I think that's something that at least you have to give him some credit for. But overall, I mean, he doesn't win the game in any scenario. I can't think of who he wins against. So obviously, it's still a very flawed game, and he still ranks here at number 60. Now, at number 59, we're moving up to a more recent, actually a very recent runner-up, and that is Nora from season 39. And I really thought about this. I really thought about moving her up, but I just really couldn't justify it. I mean, I really like Nora. I think she's someone that probably played more strategically than some of the players that we'll be talking about later on. She's someone that was kind of out of the loop at that early merge section of the game. She was someone that, while voted the majority for a good chunk of the game, she was never in that core group. And even when she tried to make a move at the final 8 there, it completely backfires on her. She's someone that gets very lucky at the final 6 where Dan gets ejected. And if it wasn't for that, I don't think she makes it to the final tribal council anyway, as we saw in the show, that Tommy, Dean, and Dan had a final 3, and I'm very inclined to think that that's what would have actually happened. She was also convinced by Tommy to take him to the end, which I don't think was the right strategic move there. Overall, I mean, I just see very little to be impressed by in her game, even though I do think she probably played more strategically than the next couple people we'll be talking about. But for me, she still ranks here at number 59. Number 58, we have a player from season 33. We have Ken McNichol. And I thought about this one for a while too. I mean, I considered putting him in that second in command tier, which is much higher up, as he was technically the second in command to David. However, I just thought about it more and more, and I just realized that, like, the thing is, he had no respect from the jury. He never really played the game strategically, and the biggest factor here is that he didn't really have any input in how David dominated the game. Unlike a lot of the people that we'll be talking about in the second command tier later on, those people had actual input in the game. Like, they are people that, while they were in second command, they actively helped themselves be second in command. I don't feel like Ken did that. I feel like Ken actively ruined that. It was just very lucky that he didn't get taken out. I mean, obviously the move with Will, where he pisses off Will right when Will was the swing vote at the Final 9 Tribal. I think that's ridiculously dumb. None of the jury respected him. He didn't even get the votes of David or Jessica. He more than likely loses if it was a final 2 between him and Hannah. I just don't feel like there's many reasons to put him any higher on the list. So for me, he ranks here at number 58. At number 57, I have the final player in this, like, clueless tier for me, and that is Philip Shepard from season 22. And the main reason he's here is because, again, he had no shot of winning that season. He was someone that was never part of the core group, but was someone that was being dragged along by Boston Rob. And the main reason he's above, like, people like Ken and Nora is because he was in the majority for the entirety of the game. I mean, again, because of Boston Rob, he was in the majority the entire time, had an idea of what was going on outside of probably the first couple votes, but definitely the entire post-merge, he knew what was going on at every step. But again, was never an active contributor to his strategy, merely just followed orders, and even then had no shot at winning the game. So for me, he still ranks here at number 57. So now we're moving on to the under the radar tier. And in my original winner ranking, there was actually a tier in between these with the bad dominance tier, which included Mike and Ben. And while you could debate someone like Dreams or Sugar, which we'll talk about later, could fall into this tier, I decided that this bad dominance tier should be people that dominated probably like half the game, but then from that point on had to win out or idle out, and there just wasn't any runners up that really fell into that category. So we're just moving straight on to the under the radar tier, which was a massive tier of people. This is a tier of 16 players here. So I decided to split this tier into two. There's the active under the radar tier and the passive under the radar tier. Obviously for me, I consider the passive under the radar tier to be the lower tier. So let's get started with that. So at 56, the first person in this tier is Cassandra from Survivor Fiji. And for me, I just felt like Cassandra did nothing. I really can't think of a single thing Cassandra did outside of align with Dreams. And that's the weird thing, is that she was kind of the second in command to Dreams, especially in that end game. But she was the second in command to a player that didn't even dominate the game himself. Like, it's not really an impressive game at all to me. She had no real chance of winning the game unless it was a final 2 with Dreams. And even then, I mean, I guess Cassandra does win. Which, I mean, to be fair, that could have been a likely scenario considering Fiji was a season that was filmed before the contestants knew about the final 3. So to be fair, I mean, Cassandra could have won this game, but I just felt like she did nothing to make that actually happen, so she still ranks here at number 56 for me. Now at number 55, we have the other runner-up from Survivor Redemption Island. We have Natalie Tenorelli, and I considered putting her in the second in command tier. I decided against it as, again, I just decided that she didn't have the strategic input that's necessary for that second command tier. She was kind of just there. I mean, I don't feel like she did much outside of a line with Boston Rob, and even then she betrayed some of her allies in Andrea and Ashley to stick with Boston Rob and to get Boston Rob to the end with Phillip. And she is someone that probably wins in a final 2 against Phillip, so I mean, at least that's something, but again, that was never happening, so there's not really much to really say about Natalie Tenorelli. She didn't play a good game, so she ranks here at number 55. At number 54, I have a runner-up from a more recent season, and that is Troyzan from Survivor Game Changers. And Troyzan was tough to place. I really didn't know where to place him. I decided, again, under the radar, passive is kind of probably where he fits. He didn't really make any individual moves in the season outside of, I guess, finding an idol, and then, I guess, technically he saved himself at the final 6. At least saved himself from a rock draw, so there's that. And he's kind of in a similar situation to Cassandra, where he's the second command to someone that didn't dominate the game. He's the second command to Brad, but Brad didn't even dominate the game. So it's like, what do I do with Troyzan then? Again, I had very little strategic input throughout the season, was someone that wasn't respected by the jury. Even though the jury seemed to like him, on a personal level, they didn't seem to respect his game. So again, he ranks here at number 54. At number 53, I think people are probably upset that this person isn't lower, but I have from Survivor Worlds Apart, I have Will Sims. And this is the thing about Will Sims. Will Sims is someone that obviously played a very passive game at the end game, did absolutely nothing strategically. Was really, again, the second command to Rodney, who I do think Rodney did control the game, but obviously he didn't end up getting to the end anyway, so it's like, whatever. The reason Will is this high on the list is that I do think there are probably scenarios where Will wins the game, or at least comes close to winning the game. The thing is, he was liked out there by people like a Tyler and a Dan and a Rodney. Coming into that final tribal, Dan and Tyler were actually voting for Will over Mike. I mean, I think that's something you have to at least give Will some credit for. I also feel like Will did know when the right time to turn was. He did flip right at the perfect time at the beginning of the merge and integrated himself into the majority. I do think there's things that are positive about Will's game, but again, his end game was nothing. I mean, he just followed Rodney. That's pretty much his entire end game. So for me, he still ranks pretty low here at number 53. At number 52, we have another person that came relatively close to winning the game. And to be honest, if they didn't come close to winning the game, they would not be in this tier. But that person is Susie Smith from Survivor Gabon. And I know a lot of people say, oh, Susie should have won Gabon. And I mean, to be honest, I personally agree. I mean, to be fair, I would have voted for Sugar if I could have out of the 3. But I definitely would have voted for Susie over Bob. But I mean, Susie's not good. I mean, she almost won the game. She lost in a 4-3 vote. She only needed one more vote, and that vote was Randy, and that could have actually gone to her at that point. But for me, the biggest problem with Susie's game is, again, she was never really a major factor in that majority group. She was completely on the outs for the entire pre-merge section of the game, and once she gets to the post-merge, she was in the majority with her, Maddie, Sugar, Kenny, and Crystal. And through her relationship with Maddie, she was dragged even further into the game. But I think a massive downside for her is that she needed that final immunity. Like, why does someone like Susie need to win final immunity to make it to the end? I mean, she's someone that should be dragged there. So for me, that's a massive downside in her game. But again, she does come one vote away from winning the game. So, I mean, at least that's something. So she ranks here at number 52. At number 51, I have another person who got a few votes at Final Tribal Council, and that is Courtney Yates from Survivor China. And yeah, she got 2 votes. She had a very good Final Tribal Council performance. But I feel like outside of that, while she was in the majority, again, she was in the majority with Todd and Amanda. I don't feel like she really did much within that majority. And I don't think she really did much to get in that majority. Obviously, she built a really strong bond with both Amanda and Todd, and you can give her credit for that. But again, we never see her do anything strategically within the game. And even when she gets the Final Tribal Council, the votes that she gets are mostly anti-Todd and Amanda votes. And I don't feel like she wins in any scenario where I feel like if she was in a scenario where Todd wasn't in the final 3, I feel like then Amanda would get the votes. So I don't feel like she was in a scenario to win. I don't feel like she controlled the game. But then again, she was in the majority for a lot of the game. But then again, a lot of these under-the-radar sort of players were. So I don't feel like her game was very impressive outside of her building bonds with the people that did control the game. So for me, she ranks here at number 51. So now at number 50, I have a more recent runner-up, and that's from season 38, Edge of Extinction. We have Julie Rosenberg. And I really didn't know what to do with Julie. I mean, I really shifted her around multiple times, shifted her between tiers multiple times. And I decided to land in the passive under the radar tier just because I feel like there were multiple points in the season where she was blindsided. She was blindsided at the Eric vote. She was blindsided at the Ron vote. She was someone that had very little agency within the game, even though I do think she thought about the game strategically. Someone that thought about the game in a more modern sense, but didn't really execute it in that way. She's obviously someone that was dragged to the end. She played a fake idol. I don't feel like there's much impressive when you look at her strict resume, but I do think as a player, she's a higher caliber than someone like a Susie or Will Sims, but doesn't really have the game to back her up being any higher than where she is right now. Now, number 49 from Survivor Palau, we have Katie Gallagher. And Katie was another one that was tough to rank. I didn't know whether to put her in under active or passive, because I do feel like she's someone that tried to play the game in that end game and was pretty much in the middle of the like Greg and Jen side and the Ian and Tom side. However, I just don't feel like she had any chance of ever winning the game. And also, even then, when she was in the middle at the final 6, pretty much forced the side with the Tom and Ian side, which I do think is a downside against her as well. She was another person that was just dragged to the end as an easy GOAT. She loses with only 1 vote from Kobe, and even then, that was a vote against Tom. She was technically voting in the majority for the entirety of the game, and I do think that's something you have to at least give her credit for. But outside of that, she was just a follower for almost the entirety of it. So for me, she still ranks here at number 49. At number 48, I have the final runner-up that lands into my passive under-the-radar tier. And this is another runner-up that I had no clue what to do with. I didn't know what to do with him, and that is Mick Trimming from Survivor Samoa. I really don't know anything that he really did in the game. I mean, he was in the minority at the very beginning. He doesn't vote out Marissa. But from that point on, he is in the majority group. He does vote with the majority. I just don't know what he did to be in that majority. And I don't think he really added to the strategy of the season at all from what we've seen. I just really don't know anything he did. And the reason why he's at the top of this tier is I do think there was at least a possibility that he wins a jury vote, which is more than I could say about the last couple people. But I mean, really, I just didn't know what to do with him. So he just ranks here at number 48. Now we're moving on to the active under the radar tier, which is, as I said, people who are still under the radar, but were at least like very close to winning the game in terms of like they were literally like one little thing away from winning the game, or people who like controlled certain parts of the game, but then had absolutely no control of other parts. So at number 47, I have a runner-up that another one that I just didn't really know what to do with. But here we have Jacqueline Schultz. And for me, she was someone that had good reads on the game. She was someone that knew what Natalie was doing at certain points. But I also feel like she's someone that fell out of the majority at points. And while she was in the majority for a good chunk of the post-merge, she was in the minority during the pre-swap section of the game. And she was also someone in the minority at the very end of the game, where she has to be saved by Natalie's idol. And for that, I do feel like that's a massive downside to her game. But as I said, I do think she was in the majority. She was pretty much the center of the game with John Mish. But I still don't find the end of her game that impressive, so she still ranks here at number 47. Now, at number 46, we have the latest runner-up on this list, and that is Dean Kowalski from season 39. He was another one that I had a lot of difficulty ranking. I mean, the tough thing about Dean is that he was someone that wasn't in the majority for almost the entire game. And you add that to him needing an idol when Kelly saves him at the last tribal before the merge. You have him potentially being able to make a big move at the final 8, but then him telling Tommy instead. I don't think those things are great, but you also have him being a very strategic player, someone that made a very innovative move with the fake legacy advantage. You had him finding an idol, him having the idol nullifier, successfully playing the idol nullifier, winning the fire making challenge. I mean, I do think there's some merit to his game. I think you could debate was a second in command to Tommy, as we do learn later on that it does turn out that him and Tommy had a final 2 deal from very early on in the merge. I do feel like that was enough for me to bump him up to this active under the radar tier over the previous 2, but not really much higher than that, so he ranks here at number 46. Now at number 45, we have another more recent runner-up, and this is Laurel from Survivor Ghost Island. And again, she played behind Wendell and Dominic. I mean, that's pretty much all I can really say about her. I mean, she did have some strategic agency at the beginning of the game. She does actively trick Wendell and Dominic at the 3rd Tribal Council of the season where Morgan goes home. But after that, I mean, I do feel like she pretty much just followed Wendell and Dominic the rest of the way. And when she was given opportunities to blindside him at multiple points, she decided not to. to the point where it was just too late. She couldn't really do anything by the time of the final 6 due to their use of idols. So again, I do feel like she had some control at parts of the game, but just didn't decide to utilize that control outside of very, very early on in the game. So for me, she still ranks here at number 45. At number 44, I have someone who I feel like dominated the first half of her game, but then had absolutely no agency in the second half, and that is Sherry from Survivor Karamoan. Again, Sherry completely dominated that fans tribe. I mean, she had complete control of that tribe, had a goat in Shamar to drag to the end, had this alliance with all the women in Julia and Laura, and also had a very strong alliance with Michael and Matt. That obviously made up the majority there, but she had no agency once she lost that. I mean, she lost that at the swap, where she was very clearly in minority there, and then once we get to the merge, she just latches herself to Philip and also Cochran and Dawn eventually, and is able to be dragged to the end. I mean, she really does nothing strategically from that point on. But as I said, she completely dominated that initial tribe, and I feel like that's enough to put her towards the top of this under the radar tier. So because of that, she ranks at number 44. Now at number 43, I have another runner-up that I do consider pretty similar to Sherry. And for me, that is Angelina from Survivor 37. And again, someone that dominated her initial tribe, even though that only lasted 3 tribal councils. But she did dominate that initial tribe, was a major factor in that initial tribe, and stayed in the majority through her swap tribe as well. But I do feel like she loses control after the merge. I mean, obviously she makes the move with Elizabeth that makes it very clear to the other people that she's pandering for jury votes. She was someone that was able to align with Carl immediately before Carl was blindsided himself. She then aligns herself with Mike White, and obviously that does lead her to the end of the game. But I do feel like she's someone that, again, had a very messy game, was out of control for a lot of that post-merge, but she did have a lot of control earlier on in the game. So for me, she still ranks here at number 43. Now, number 42, we have a runner-up that I just didn't know what to do with. This person came so close to winning, literally one slip-up away to winning the game, in my opinion, and that is Clay Jordan. Clay is someone I do think played very passively. I did consider putting him in the passive under the radar tier because of that, but the more I thought about it, it's just like he came so close to winning. I mean, he was literally one slip up from Brian away from winning the game. I mean, if Brian had just revealed the situation with Ken, I do think Ted flips his vote, and I do think Clay ends up winning the season. Clay was the second command to Brian the entire way through. Again, the reason why he's not in the second command tier, though, is, again, I don't feel like he had much strategic agency within that. But I do think he had some social agency. I do think he actively made relationships with some of the Sukchai people, which got him to that position where it became a 4-3 vote. I do think he did things within the game that were impressive. But again, he was someone that wasn't respected by his own alliance members. It was even thought of as a racist or a bigot by some of them, which, again, I think probably came from Brian. For me, though, he ranks here at number 42. Number 41, the final runner-up in this under-the-radar tier, is a runner-up that came so close to winning, and that is Wu Wang from Survivor Cagayan. I considered putting him in second command. Again, just didn't feel like he had the strategic agency to do that. But he is someone that came one vote away from winning the game. I mean, he's someone that if he votes out Tony instead of Cass, he wins the game. He wins the game against Cass. I think he's also someone that possibly wins against a Trish. So I do feel like there are scenarios where he wins the game. It's just that he didn't actively do those. And even the vote for him at the final tribal council, which was Tasha, was an anti-Tony vote. Like, it's not even like he actually got that vote himself. So, I mean, Wu played a bad game, but he just came so close to winning that I couldn't completely ignore that. So I decided to put him at number 41 solely because of that. So now we're moving on to what I like to call the messy aggressive tier. And this is kind of a mix of a couple things, whether that be people who had a lot of control in the game but had absolutely no shot of ever winning the game, or people that needed idols or immunity wins to get towards the end of the game. That's the sort of tier that we're at. And we're starting off with actually a good amount of people that had control but were never winning the game. And at number 40 here, we have Michael Skupin. And okay, obviously there's a lot of bad stuff about Michael Skupin now, but I'm strictly talking about his game. He was someone that had a lot of control in that game. He was someone that, with his alliance with Lisa, pretty much dominated everything from the final 9 on. I mean, he's the one that flips at the final 9 to take out Artis. From that point, him and Lisa pretty much are making the decisions of who gets to the end, and obviously that ends up being Denise. but he's someone that never had a shot of winning the game. I mean, he was never going to be granted the win by this jury. No one respected him here. And I think he was just straight up delusional at how well of a game he played, where even coming into the final tribal council, he thought he won against Denise. And he kept on talking about how he thought he would win against Malcolm. Like, he was really delusional about the game he played. So for me, he ranks here at number 40. At number 39, I have another very similar winner to that, and that is Monica Culpepper from season 27. And again, someone that I don't think the jury was ever going to reward with a win, someone that was looked at as very annoying. But again, she was a kingmaker in the game, essentially. And again, that's what a lot of these people are. They were the kingmakers, the people that had no shot of winning the game, but actively chose who did win the game. And I feel like Monica was a major factor in that, where she had multiple times where she could have flipped on Tyson and Jervis, but never did. And because of that, obviously Tyson ends up winning the game. But I do think she's also someone that did have a lot of strategic agency, especially in the beginning of the game, where she was in the majority group for the first half of the game. She's someone that was able to get through the stigma against her that came from the Brad Culpepper stuff. But overall, again, she just had no shot of ever winning, so she ranks here at number 39. At number 38, we have another similar runner-up here, and we have Sugar Kuiper from Survivor Gabon. And again, another person, no shot of ever winning the game. No jury was ever going to award her with the votes, but she pretty much controlled the entire post-merge of the game. She pretty much controlled everything that happened. I mean, she was the one to flip against the old Kodas and caused the Fongs to have the majority. No one ever really tried to get her out. Then again, why would they when she wouldn't win the game anyway? And she also had an idol. But she was also a major factor at the Final Four in saving Bob, which again, I think is still the wrong move. I mean, it doesn't matter because like she never wins the game anyway. But the fact that she goes out of her way to piss off Maddie by taking Maddie out of the game to keep Bob, who she loses against anyway, it's just like, again, it's not good. She's never winning the game, wasn't respected by the jury, but she did have control. So again, she ranks here at number 38. At number 37, we have a very similar runner-up for me, and that is Dreams from Survivor Fiji. And I actually like Dreams' game. I am a big defender of Dreams. I think Dreams is someone that, even though, again, jury was never going to reward him with the money, they never respected him. And I do think he did things to merit that. But I do think he's also someone that I was actually impressed by at points. I mean, the fact that he was so readily willing to flip on Yao-Man immediately after the car deal was made, I think is a very impressive move by him. And obviously it gets found out due to Stacy being an idiot. He also flips against his 4 Horsemen alliance, which, I mean, that's a debatable move. Obviously it pisses off the entire 4 Horsemen, which were 3 jury votes that he needed, but I do think that secures him a spot later on in the game. I think he built a very strong relationship with Cassandra that pretty much made Cassandra do whatever he wanted to do, and obviously he doesn't give up immunity to Yao at the Final Four. Then again, I think that was more of an emotional decision than an actual strategic decision, but I do think there are things that I was impressed by in his game, but he's also, again, one of these people that, while he had control in the game, especially at the end game, it was mostly due to him being a GOAT, and he didn't really have much agency at other points in the game. So for me, he ranks here at number 37. At number 36, we have probably what I would consider one of the better players out of this like tier of people who couldn't win the game, and that is Hannah from season 33. And I liked Hannah's game. I've said this before. I would have voted for Hannah over Adam. I think Hannah was more strategically aware within the game. I think she was someone that was in the majority for more of the game. While Adam was blindsided at the Mari vote, Hannah was told right beforehand about it. While Adam was all gung-ho about getting rid of David at the Final 5, Hannah was the one to flip to save him. And I actually don't disagree with the move to save David at the Final 5, as I do think that's an obvious boot for the Final 4. Which obviously guarantees her Final 3, though at the same time, obviously it's a bad look to the jury that you're keeping the biggest threat in the game. But I do feel like it was the correct move, at least in theory. She's also someone that played the middle towards the beginning of the merge, where she was aligned with Zeke, and she was also aligned with David. And that caused her to obviously have to pick sides at the final 10, and obviously that led to the rock draw. But I do feel like she's someone that had a lot of agency within the game. It's just that some of that agency was probably misplaced, and she had no real shot of winning the game. But she is someone that I did like her game overall, so she ranks here at number 36. Now at number 35, we have another runner-up that probably had no shot of winning the game, and that is Danielle DiLorenzo from season 12. And I think Danielle actually had a pretty strong game in the pre-merge. I mean, while obviously she was very argumentative and very emotional, I do think she's also someone that played pretty aggressively. She was someone that was part of that initial core group of her, Courtney, Shane, and Aris. She was also part of that women's alliance that controlled that Bobby vote. She would also come into the merge. She was obviously in the majority all the way through up until like the final 4, where the only reason she's out of the majority there is because of Terry's idol. I feel like she plays that perfectly, where she's able to get Terry to take her to fire making against Suri, where she obviously wins. And then after that, she obviously blindsides Terry, as Terry has a much better shot of winning against her than Aris. So there are things I'm very impressed by within her game, but I don't feel like she was perfect positioning wise. Obviously, she was very loyal to Suri when Suri was more loyal to Aris, and she's just someone that never wins at the end. I don't think she wins against anyone outside of maybe Courtney. I do find parts of her game pretty impressive, so she ranks here at number 35. At number 34, we have another runner-up that's very similar to her in my opinion. That is Missy Payne from Survivor San Juan del Sur. And another person that was in the majority for a good chunk of the game and had some control at certain points in the game, but I feel like her control was very misguided. She was part of that initial majority on her initial tribe, and once she gets this swap, I do think she has some pretty poor social play with her relationship with the Wentworths, but outside of that, she's able to get John and Jacqueline to side with them, and coming into the merge, she still remains aligned with John and Jacqueline. That pretty much leads her to the end of the game, where she does end up siding with Natalie over them and blindsiding John at the final 6, and I think that's kind of where her game goes a bit off the rails, where Baylor's blindsided the final 5, which is again obviously something that's completely against her own interest, and then at the final 4, she's for some reason someone that Keith targets when he could have targeted Natalie, which is really weird. So I do think she has some flaws in her game. She was also someone that, again, didn't play a great social game, but I do think her along with John were pretty much the figureheads for their alliance, so I didn't want to put her any lower than this tier, and for me, she ranks here at number 34. Now at number 33, we kind of have someone that's kind of in between these two different sub-tiers here, and we have Nelia from Survivor Marquesas, and I really just didn't know what to do with her also. I mean, it's really weird where there's a debate for her having dominated the early merge of the game, with her being, along with Pappy, obviously, top of that alliance that does end up running their way to the final 5, but then she did pretty much nothing in the entire game before that, and she's even admitted this to herself, that she did nothing during the entire pre-merge of the game. And it wasn't until that early merge that she really starts to get some control in the game. But then she loses that control at the final 4, where Pascal goes home and she needs to win that final 3 immunity to get herself to the end of the game. And even then, she doesn't get the respect from the jury to win the game. She just come 1 vote away, but I do feel like her final tribal performance was so bad that they couldn't even give her that 1 vote. I really didn't know what to do with Nelia. I mean, to be honest, I think there is a debate for her being higher on the list, and I would have put her higher if she was more clearly a dominant player in that early merge section of the game, but I don't even feel like that was really the case, so for me, she ranks here at number 33. Now, at number 32, we have a player from Season 32, and that is Tai Trang. And I think Tai is a bit underrated in the grand scheme of Survivor, especially for Season 32, but obviously he has massive flaws. He wasn't really in the majority group for the entirety of the pre-merge. I mean, pretty much up until that Julia vote at the penultimate tribal before the merge. I mean, really, he had no real control outside of that. To get to the merge, he's in the minority for those first few votes when he sides with Jason and Scott, eventually blindsides Scott, which is something that you give him some credit for, but I do give more credit to Aubrey for that move. And from that point on, he is in the majority for the rest of the way, and is a big decision maker at the final 4, obviously, where he's the deciding factor on Aubrey staying in the game. And all this stuff's not great, but the thing is that he probably wins a jury vote in certain scenarios. I mean, the thing is that the Jason, Scott, Julia contingent have talked about this in the past, that they were actually leaning towards voting for Tai over Aubrey. And in a scenario where Michelle doesn't win final immunity, I do think there's a very good likelihood that Tai actually ends up winning that final 3. And if not winning that, at least coming like 1 or 2 votes away from it. So I do think there are scenarios where he has the respect of the jury to end up winning the game, and I do feel like that scenario isn't that far-fetched of actually happening. So because of that, he does rank here at number 32. Now at number 31, we have a runner-up that I think a lot of people are expecting to be much higher on the list. But for me, I have Chrissy Hoffbeck. And Chrissy has a very tough game to rank, where she was very dominant earlier on in the season. Her alliance with Ben dominated that pre-swap tribe, and her alliance with Ryan and JP dominated the post-swap tribe. Then coming to the merge, she was a major figure in that majority alliance, but at the final 9, when JP gets blindsided, she kind of loses control of the game, and she has no clue what's going on for the next few rounds of the game, up until the final 6, where she does regain control once again, where she does take out Ashley, but there are also points where she does questionably need immunity. She does win a lot of immunities during this point, But again, that's not really going to factor too much here. And she does get massively screwed over by that final 4 twist where obviously Ben gets to go to the final 3. But I don't think Chrissy was winning anyway. A lot of people keep on saying Chrissy was robbed. I really don't see it that way. I don't think Chrissy was ever winning in a final 3 scenario. There's so many people on the jury that just didn't care for her. From a Desi to a Joe. And while Joe says now that, oh, I would have voted for Chrissy in the final tribal council, I think that's complete revisionist history. As he said earlier on, closer to when the season was airing, that he would have voted for Ryan, which, I mean, again, I just think there's no merit to what he's saying there where he says now that he would have voted for Chrissy. So I don't think Chrissy ever wins the game, but I will give her credit for obviously dominating certain parts of the game. But again, she does completely lose control of parts of the game, never wins the game. So for me, she ranks here at number 31. Now at number 30, we have a very similar runner-up for me to Chrissy, and that is actually Brad Culpepper from Survivor Game Changers, obviously. And I think Brad played a pretty dominant game up until the final 11. I think he completely dominates his initial tribe. He completely dominates his post-swap tribe. He does end up kind of on the minority on his second swap tribe, but I do think he does a lot of good work building relationships with people like Aubrey to keep himself out of danger at that point. When we get to the merge, he's part of the majority, where he's a central figure in that group that dictates the Aussie blind side. But then after that, he loses control, and he does need a couple immunity challenges to get towards the end of the game. But again, I think he regains control towards the end of the game, where at the final 6, after he wins immunity, I mean, his side's pretty much loaded with advantages to where they're safe. And then from that point on, he's a major factor in those last couple votes. Now, obviously, I think he makes the wrong decision with those votes, where obviously he loses against Sarah, where I do think if he was in the end against Ty, he would have had a much better shot. But even then, I don't think he really wins that. But I do think that he has at least a shot there. But the reason why I do put him over Chrissy here is I do feel like he very clearly demonstrated a lot more dominance in that early part of the game. Where again, I think the Malcolm Tribal is so masterfully played by Brad Culpepper. I think that alone puts him above Chrissy for me. But again, Brad Culpepper had a massively flawed endgame, so he ranks here at number 30. At number 29, we have the last winner that I'm going to be putting in this sort of tier, even though he doesn't really fit in this tier. It's just that he doesn't really fit anywhere. And that is Ozzy from Survivor Cook Islands. And I know a lot of people want Ozzy higher as well. However, I think Ozzy is still a very flawed player. I do think he has initial control of his initial tribe, where he does control the Billy vote. But outside of that, I don't feel like he had much agency strategically within the game at all. I think he's someone that was in the minority for a good chunk of the pre-merge. And obviously, once the mutiny happens, he does end up being part of that core 4, as he kind of needed to be. And then he pretty much wins almost every challenge once the merge happens. He literally wins 5 out of the 6 immunity challenges. And while it's very impressive, that's not really something I really factor in. And the fact that he probably needed to win some of those endgame challenges, where I think there's a debate for Final 6 he needed. I think there's a debate for Final 5 he needed. He 100% needed the Final 4 immunity challenge to get to the end of the game. I think those are all major knocks against him. Now, obviously, he does come very close to winning the game, but then again, he gets a lot of votes from people he never even met. But I do think it is hard to deny the fact that he does win the game if Yule doesn't make that deal with Adam. Obviously, Yule made a deal with Adam to where Adam would give Yule his jury vote if he voted out Penner first. Obviously, when that happens, Yule secures Adam's jury vote, where Adam has talked openly that he would have voted for Ozzy if he was voting on his own will. So I do think you have to give Ozzy at least some credit to the point where he would have won a jury vote if that wasn't involved. But that was involved, and he was outplayed by Yule. So for me, he still ranks here at number 29. All right, now we're moving on to the second in command tier, the tier that I've been talking about a lot already. Where again, these are players that were second in command to other players, and also had a lot of strategic input in how they made their decisions. Now, a lot of these people had very little shot of actually winning the game, and that's kind of why they're in this tier, but I do still think you have to give some credit to these people that dominated the game alongside someone else, and were just looked at as the more passive player of the two. Now, at number 28 here, we have Tasha Fox from Survivor Cambodia. And this is what I debated on. I debated on whether or not to consider her a second in command to Jeremy. I decided to do so as she voted along with Jeremy for a good chunk of the game. There was a couple points where she didn't, namely the Sierra boot where she did vote against Steven, but for the most part, and especially in the end game, I do feel like she pretty much worked alongside Jeremy However, I think Jeremy was very clearly the more dominant presence there. Though I do think there are points where Tasha does get her way, and I do think that's enough to put her in the second command tier. She's also someone that had a lot of agency at this first swap, where she's able to convince Abby Maria to flip against her initial group, and I think that's very impressive as well. But again, she never wins a jury vote. I mean, she had no respect from a majority of the jury, and the respect that she did have, those people had more respect for Jeremy. So I really feel like she had no real shot of winning this season. I mean, it's pretty open that she would have lost in a final 2 against Spencer. So really, I mean, there's not really much to praise about her endgame there. So for me, she ranks here at number 28. Now at number 27, I had someone that I initially ranked a lot higher. I actually ranked her in a messy dominant tier that we'll be talking about later, but I decided to knock a lot more against her, and that is Stephanie LaGrosa from obviously Survivor Guatemala. I initially looked at her as a dominant player, someone that was out in front, which she was. But the more I thought about it, she really was the second command to Rafe. When you really think about her game, she never actually gets her way. Rafe always gets his way the entire time, and Stephanie kind of takes the brunt for those moves. Doesn't want to get rid of Judd, but Rafe does, and because of that, Judd goes home. Same thing with Cindy. Cindy goes home. Same thing with Lydia. Lydia goes home. There's never a point in that endgame where Stephanie actually gets what she wants. And because of that, she ends up in the final 2 with Danny, who's someone who absolutely demolishes her. And mind you, she would have also been demolished against Rafe as well. So, I mean, really, she had no shot of winning this game. She was never someone that was respected by the jury, never someone that the jury was actually going to give their votes to. So while she was the figurehead of the alliance, someone that was out in front, she never actually got her way. So for me, she ranks here at number 27. And number 26 is a player that I really didn't know what to do with. I mean, this was a weird situation where I actually considered the winner of the season to have 2 second commands. So the lower ranked of these second commands is Sabrina from Survivor One World, and I just didn't know what to do with her. I technically considered her a second command to Kim. I do feel like she had some strategic input at points, but I do feel like she was the third wheel of that group, of the Kim, Chelsea, and Sabrina group. But I do feel like she was also closer to winning the game than Chelsea. I feel like she had more respect from the jury than Chelsea. But I think her allowing Kim to get to the end game is obviously a massive flaw in her game. Even when looking at the jury votes that she got, the 2 jury votes that she got were more anti-Kim votes, especially the Troyzan vote, than pro-Sabrina votes. So, I don't know. For me, she ranks here at number 26. And at 25, I have the other second command in Chelsea Meisner. And I just consider Chelsea to be a more true second command to Kim than Sabrina. I think Chelsea was someone that we did see talking through scenarios with Kim, someone that was Kim's closer ally. Like if there was a final 2 on the season, I do think Kim chooses Chelsea over Sabrina. And I do feel like if Kim had been voted out at final 4 or something, I feel like Chelsea is the person that gets a lot of the credit for the Kim moves. So because of that, I decided to rank Chelsea slightly higher than Sabrina. Now, number 24, we have again another second command, and that is Jervis from Survivor Blood vs. Water. Obviously, Jervis was a pretty clear second command to Tyson the entire way through, and I don't think there's really much of a chance of him ever winning the game. I do think it's very tough for him to win a jury vote, especially with him blindsiding Aris and Vita, someone he had a pre-game alliance with, and also him just acting like a dick towards people like Hayden and Sierra. But again, he was second command. I do think he's someone that would have at least tried to make a move had Tyson not win those final 2 immunity challenges. But he was kind of in a bad spot where if he made a move anytime before the final 4, he had no real shot of making it past the next round unless he won immunity. And also in that scenario, someone like Atina beats him anyway. So I don't really feel like there was much that he could really do there. So I don't really fault him that much for that. But he was a second command. He really had no real shot of winning the game. So I feel like 24 is the highest I can really place him. Now, number 23, I have another second in command, and that is Becky from Survivor Cook Islands. And the reason why I decided to put Becky higher than Jervis is I do feel like she gets a lot more jury votes. I feel like she's someone that in the scenario that Cook Islands should have been, which is a final 2, I do think Ozzy wins final immunity. I think he takes Becky. And then at the final 2, I do think Becky gets 4 votes. I think Becky gets the Yule votes outside of the Adam vote. And that's 1 vote away from winning the game. And I think that's very impressive. I do think she could have actually, in some maybe weird scenario, possibly had won the game. I don't know. But Becky, I think, is someone that is very clearly the second command to Yule. Someone that was very clearly part of his decision making. He's actually admitted that she was part of his decision making. So I feel like that's enough credit for me to rank her here at number 23, but not really much higher. Now number 22, we have another second in command. This is when I debated on putting this person higher. But when I really thought about it, I really couldn't justify it, and that is Dawn Meehan from Survivor Karamoan. And I feel like I just look at her relationship with Cochrane as differently than most people, where most people look at it as a partnership where Cochrane wasn't a dominant player because he was really sharing dominance with Dawn. I don't look at it that way. I think Cochrane clearly dominated the game, where Dawn makes a lot of moves that are against her best interests. I don't think it was in her best interest to get rid of Brenda. I think that was actually actively against her best interest. I think that ruined her game, where it greatly benefited Cochrane's game. That, and also she just had no respect from a majority of the jury. Mind you, I do think she probably wins the jury vote if Cochrane isn't there. If it's Dawn, Sherry, Eddie, I do think Dawn wins the game, and that's why she is as high as she is. But when she was against Cochrane, she really had no shot of winning that game. But again, I do think she's someone that did have control at points, along with Cochrane towards the beginning of the game. But I just think towards the end of the game, I think Cochrane clearly goes above her. So for me, she ranks here at number 22. So now we're number 21. I have the final second command runner-up here, and I think this one's a debatable one. But for me, I put Gavin Winston here from season 38. And the question is, who is he the second command to? And my answer is a lot of people. I think he was the second command to Victoria. I think he was the second command to Lauren. I think he's just a player that played passively actively, if that makes sense, where he didn't want to be the dominating force on the season. I think he was in a position where he could have been a dominating force, where he had so many relationships with Eric, relationships with Ron, relationships with Julia, relationships with Victoria, relationships with Lauren. There's so many people that he was so well positioned with, and so many people that he was like their wingman, but he never actively took the reins. But I do think his positioning, as I said, was very strong, and that's why I'm putting him so high on the list, but he was just someone that never actually did anything, where every single move that he made was a move that he was told to do by someone else, most of the time being a Victoria or a Lauren. So because of that, I do consider him a second in command player, and because of that, he ranks here at number 21. All right, now we're at the top 20, which we're reaching a new tier here, which I called flawed aggressive. And essentially by that, I mean people that obviously played the game aggressively, people that were making moves, people that were in a position to win the game, or at least trying to put themselves in a position to win the game, but just had massive flaws within that. So at number 20, I have the runner-up from season 30, and that is Carolyn Rivera. And I have a lot of issues with Carolyn's game. I think there's obviously the point where she needs the idol at the final 6 to stay in the game. I think that's a bad spot. I think she's also not really well positioned towards the end game in those last couple rounds, especially at the point at the final 4 where she needs to win that fire making challenge. I also feel like she's someone that didn't really have that much respect on the jury. I do think she wins in certain scenarios, but I do think in a Carolyn, Rodney, Will final 3, I do think she probably loses. I do think she wins against someone like a Will and a Dan and possibly a Sierra, but like she was never getting the jury votes of someone like a Dan or a Tyler. But I do think you have to give her some credit at certain points. Again, I think she pretty clearly dominated that early part of the game along with Tyler. Once she gets to the swap, she knows that it's the right time to flip. She flips against Max and Shirin. We get to the merge. She integrates herself within the majority very well, where her and Tyler are the initial swing votes, and after that become a very staple part of that majority with Rodney, Will, Dan, and Sierra. There are definitely impressive points to her game. I just think that endgame was pretty flawed, where the use of the idol and also her having no clue what was going on at the final 5 and her needing to win the final 4 fire making. I mean, there are flaws in her game. So for me, she ranks here at number 20. At number 19, we have another very flawed runner-up, but one that I do think had control at parts of the game, and that is Spencer from season 31. I think in Cambodia, there were very clearly spots where Spencer was out in front, where he was a dominant force in the game. I would say pretty much from the final 9 on, he had a lot of control in how the game played out. He was a big orchestrator of the Steven blind side. He built that core 3 with him, Jeremy, and Tasha that end up running the table. He's the one that convinced Jeremy to put all the votes on Kelly at the final 6. But at the same time, he didn't have really any control in the early section of the game. Was a major factor in the Vetus blindside. He was automatically put right back at the bottom during the Shirin boot. In the first swap, he was in the minority the entire time, had no clue that Monica was going home. In the second swap, he was so close to going home until he was saved by Sierra and Cass. So those parts aren't great, but I do think there is a chance he wins a jury vote. Not really against Kelly or Jeremy, but I do think if it was a Tasha, Abby, Spencer final 3, I do think Spencer easily wins that. But again, that was so far out, so I do think he is a very flawed runner-up, but still someone that has some pretty high points in the game, so for me, he ranks here at number 19. Now at number 18, we have the runner-up from Survivor Micronesia. We have Amanda Kimmel, obviously her Micronesia game, and I think her game is very mixed here. I think there are parts where she was in the majority, part of the majority group, particularly at the beginning of the game where she's aligned with Ozzy, James, and Parvati. And by getting Suri, they pretty much control the pre-swap section of that game. Post-swap, again, also in the majority with the favorites there. Post-merge, she starts off in the majority, still in that similar group, but then she is blindsided at the Aussie boot, but then immediately afterwards, she's able to integrate herself within the Black Widows Brigade. It's one of the factors in the Eric blindside. She's part of that Black Widow Brigade that, again, dominated that endgame. But again, there are flaws. I don't think she was a major force within that alliance. I think Parvati and Suri were two major forces there. I think she also needed that idol at the final 6, which is very bad in my opinion. But she does come relatively close to winning the game. I mean, coming into Final Tribal, I mean, Eliza didn't know where to vote. There was a very big chance that there could have been a 4-4 tie at Final Tribal. Obviously, there isn't. She ends up losing 5-3, but I do think she comes relatively close to causing that tiebreaker. But at the same time, I just don't feel like she had respect from a good chunk of that jury. I mean, Parvati had 4 locked votes coming into that Tribal, so I don't feel like there was any chance for her to outright win that season. To be honest, I think she might have even possibly had a better shot if she was against Suri. But really, who knows where Jason Siska's going to vote in that scenario, and I think he might be the decision maker there. So again, I think she has massive flaws in her game, but I do think she was impressive at points, so she ranks here at number 18. Now at number 17, I have a very similarly ranked runner-up, and I know people want this person higher as well, but for me, it's Parvati from Survivor Heroes vs. Villains. And this is the thing, I think Parvati came into this with a massive target on her back, and the fact that she ends up getting second is very impressive. But when we don't take that into account, her game is very messy. I mean, she obviously starts off the game not in the majority, but she is able to build a very strong relationship with both Russell and Danielle. She needs an idol at that Tyson Tribal Council. If she doesn't have the idol played on her, she does go home there, which I think is a massive flaw against her. Now, from that point on, she is in the majority alliance, but I feel like she has very little to do with the Jerry flipping over to cause the Rob blindside, so I don't really give her that much credit there. And she was just kind of there for the coach blindside and the Courtney vote. She didn't really want Courtney to go home. So, I mean, I don't feel like there's much credit you can really give her there. Come the merge, obviously she has the double idol play. That's something you can give her a lot of credit for. I think it's very impressive what she's able to do there. Mind you, I think it would have been more impressive if she just knew it was Jerry instead of wasting the idol on Sandra. But either way, I mean, the fact that she had 2 idols, she knew it wasn't going to be on her, and played it on 2 people that weren't her, I think that is impressive. I do think she's a major factor in the next couple votes, getting Amanda and Candace out. But then we get to the final 7, where she does lose control. I think Russell obviously outplays her there, getting Jerry on his side and taking out Danielle. And then from that point on, she needs those next 2 immunity challenges. If she doesn't win those next 2 immunity challenges, she's in big trouble. But she does win those, and then she gets to the final 4, where she loses immunity, but gets saved by the fact that Russell wants Jerry on the jury for a jury vote. And then we get the final tribal, which again, she loses 6-3. So it's again, there's a lot of downsides in her game, but I do feel like she was in control at points. And also the fact that she was such a massive target coming into the game, I do feel like that's enough to put her here at 17, but really not much higher than that. Now at number 16 is another runner-up that I really debated on. I didn't know where to put him. I considered putting him in a lower tier, but I decided to rank him a bit higher, and for me, that is Albert. And the reason why I debated putting him lower is because Sophie is in the second command tier for me. And obviously when you're thinking of that, you're thinking, well, shouldn't Albert be in the second command tier as well then? And I decided against it. And the reason for that is I feel like Albert was actively doing more. I feel like Albert was doing more to actively better his position within the game. But I think that's also because Sophie's best case scenario was what she ended up getting anyway. But I feel like Albert was more active in his game. He was obviously behind coach the entire season, but I do feel like he's someone that, as I said, like tried to come out of that. I think he's someone that tried to orchestrate blindsides earlier on this season. He's someone that was very impressive in being able to get Brandon to give him the idol, which I think is a mind-blowing move. I don't think he gets enough credit for. Obviously, he didn't have the respect of the jury, and I think that's obviously a massive downside for him. But I do think he played more actively than someone like a Sophie, so I decided to bump him up a tier. And considering he didn't need things like idols, I decided to land him here at number 16. Now at number 15, we have another runner-up that is very similar to Albert in my opinion, and that is Sash from Survivor Nicaragua. And I think the difference here is I feel like there are points where Albert was caught in his lies and was in the minority because of that. But I don't feel like that's the situation with Sash. I feel like Sash was actually in the majority for a good chunk of the game. The only time where he was not in the majority was right after Nyanka and Kelly Purple quit the game. Those are two of his closest allies at that point. And for them to quit the game and him to end up in a minority at that point, only for him to get back in the majority, I think is very impressive. At the same time, though, he was never winning the game. I mean, he had no respect from the jury. I don't think there's any scenario where he wins the game against anybody. But I do think he was very good at strategically maneuvering the game. He was able to get Marty to give him the idol, which is ridiculous that even happened. He was a major decision maker in a lot of the early game. Him along with Brenda were major decision makers up until pretty much Brenda's boot, where he does pull off some blindsides. But again, the fact that he was just never winning the game, and also him not having very clear dominant control of the game, as I said, I feel like he shared it with Brenda, that lands him here at number 15. Now for the final runner-up in this tier, I know people will disagree with this ranking, but for me, it is Ryan from season 35. I personally believe that Ryan wins the game if he gets to the final three. In the final three, that was supposed to happen, which is him, Devin, and Chrissy. I think he has a major argument there with Devin being a very close ally of his and Chrissy being a very close ally of his, but Chrissy and Devin having no real connection. I think that would have been a major argument for him in that final tribal, and I think he's just someone that was more well-liked than someone like a Chrissy, and someone that people knew his game more than someone like a Devin. I do think there's a chance that Devin wins the game, but I don't think it's very clear cut, and I do think there's more of a likelihood that Ryan wins that season, in my opinion, as Ryan does 100% get the vote of Ben and supposedly Joe. Even again, Joe keeps on flip-flopping on who he would have voted for, but whatever. But I do think Ryan played a very impressive game. He ends up being a major factor in that initial tribe where he teams up with Devin, and through that, they pretty much dominate that initial tribe. In the post-swap, he flips over to the Chrissy side of things and is able to pretty much run things until the merge. At the merge, him along with Chrissy are pretty much in control of that majority alliance until the flip against JP at the final 9. And just like Chrissy, at that point, he's kind of out of the loop for a little while. He's able to get two of his closest allies to align with each other in Chrissy and Devin, try to make a run for the final 3, which obviously gets stopped by the final making challenge. And that's something that you can't really flaw him for, especially because it was something that was completely unprecedented at the time. So I do think there's a debate for him being a bit too high, but for me, considering I do think he almost won the season, I do find it very impressive that he's able to get all of his closest allies towards the end of the game, and he did have the respect of certain people that would have been on the jury had that original situation happen. So for me, he ranks here at number 14. Alright, now we're moving on to people that, if they had won, I would have considered them top tier winners of Survivor. These are people that I think played dominant games of Survivor, but just didn't get the jury votes to win at the end. So for me, there is complete dominance, flawed dominance, and messy dominance. And we're starting it off here with the people I considered in this messy dominance tier. Starting off with number 13, and we have Twyla. And Twyla is a very weird person to rank. I didn't know where to really rank her. I think there's a debate for her to be like a tier lower than this, as I do feel like she's someone that was in the majority for almost the entire game. Even where after the swap, she didn't come into that in the majority, but she was able to integrate herself with the majority there, which I think is very impressive. Come the merge, her and Scout were very big players in the game. And the reason why I do think there's a debate for her being a tier lower is I do think Scout was actually more of the strategic mind in the group, as we do see her being the one that actually comes up with the plan to get Chris and Eliza on board at the final 7 to flip against Leanne. After the final 7, she was able to secure Chris being with her and Scout, which were able to make them the final 3, and at that point, Chris was taking Twyla and Scout was taking Twyla. So I do think she did a very good job at positioning in that season, but again, I think she's someone that very rarely wins the game. I really can't think of a scenario where she wins the game. She's also someone that was pretty bad socially at points, so I do think this is the highest I can put her. And to be honest, in retrospect, maybe I should have bumped her down a little bit. But for now, she's here at number 13. At number 12, we have another runner-up that I debated over whether she was dominant or not. and I really didn't know where to put her, but I decided to put her as a dominant runner-up, and that is Lisa from season 25. And this one's tough because I do feel like for the first half of the game, she had no real agency in the game. She wasn't in the majority at all. But then come the merge, I do think she builds strong relationships with Malcolm and Denise, and obviously she already had a strong relationship with Scoopin', but she still doesn't make her move. I mean, she does try to make a move against Malcolm at the final 10, and I think that's obviously something that blows up in her face, but at least she tried to make the move. At the final 9, she decides to stay loyal to her group, but at the final 8, she finally decides to flip, and I feel like from that point on, her and Scoopin' dominate the game. But the reason why I give her more credit than Scoopin' is because I do feel like Lisa wins more scenarios. I feel like if Lisa gets to the end with Scoopin' and Abby, Lisa easily wins the game, and I feel like that's a scenario that could have easily happened. But I feel like she mismanaged that final 5 vote where they vote out Abby instead of taking her to the end. And I feel like if they did that, she would have won the game, which is obviously a flaw, but at the same also a pro, where she did come close to winning the game. That was a scenario that was likely if she had just been thinking about the game in a better way. So I do feel like she's someone that I do credit as someone that could have won the game and someone that did dominate a good chunk of that end game, but still had a lot of flaws within it. So for me, she ranks here at number 12. Now at number 11, from Heroes vs. Villains, we have Russell Hantz. Obviously, Russell Hantz is Heroes vs. Villains game. And, okay, this is the thing about Russell Hantz. I feel like he has a lot of control in this end game. I feel like that's something that from the final, let's say 7 on, I think he 100% dominates everything that happens from that point on. I think he has complete control. I also feel like he has complete control from the Tyson vote until the merge. I feel like that's also a very good section of his game. However, he's in the minority at the very beginning of the game. He tries to integrate himself with Parvati and Danielle and also goes out finding idols, and that leaves him in the minority. I don't think that's great. I think also early merge, he's kind of out of the loop of what's going on with the idol play. Though obviously you give him a lot of credit for tricking the heroes to begin with and also being able to get JT's idol due to him building this perception that he's on the outs, which I do think is a very impressive thing on his part. But again, I think final 9, he gets tricked into wasting his idol. Final 8, he's blindsided when Candace goes home as he really didn't think that she was getting the split vote. So I do think that's bad sections of his game. He's obviously very bad socially in this season. I think a lot of people discredit his season 19 game by saying he was so bad socially, and we'll talk about that a bit later, but I feel like with season 20, that is 100% true. Again, like the way he treats Rupert especially is terrible. Like the moment where he says, "You're a dumbass, Rupert," is one of the worst social plays I've ever seen in the history of the show. There's also the fact that he never wins any scenario. I don't think he wins any scenario in the final 3, though I do think if there was a final 2, I do think there's some chances that he could possibly win. And I do think there's scenarios that he gets some votes. There were a lot of anti-Parvati members on the jury that I do think Russell would have gotten some votes from people like a JT, and possibly Amanda, possibly a Candace, if it was a final 2 against Parvati. But overall, I mean, again, that scenario was never happening. So Russell, very flawed game in Heroes vs. Villains. He ranks here at number 11. And at number 10, we actually have the last runner-up from the first few seasons of the show, and that is Colby Donaldson. And this is one I debated on as well, of where I should put him. As, was he a second command to Tina, or was he shared dominance with Tina, which would put him where he's at right now? And I decided obviously on the latter. However, I do think there are parts where Tina should get a lot more credit. I think a big factor in that is the final 6. I think the final 6 where Amber goes home, that's something that Colby didn't want. I think you give Tina more credit there. There's also the final 3 where Tina was better positioned there. I think you give more points to Tina. And obviously the fact that Tina wins against him in a 4-3 vote. But I think Colby played a very impressive game in his own right. I think Colby was in the majority more so at the beginning of the game than Tina, where he was aligned with Mitchell, Amber, and Jerry, but Tina was able to convince him to flip against them, and that's what causes the flip against Mitchell. But from that point on, he stays in the majority the rest of the game. Again, outside of the Amber vote, which, again, he knew about, but just didn't want Amber to go home. He stays in the majority the rest of the way. He wins immunity 5 times. Each of those times, he didn't need it outside of that final 3, where even then, he just didn't want Keith to win. Even if Tina had won, she would have taken him to the end also. So, again, Colby, pretty dominant player with some major flaws. he ranks here at number 10. Now at number 9, we have a runner-up that I know people have ranked pretty highly, and that is Aubrey. Okay, Aubrey is someone that I've gone back and forth on my opinions of her game. I ranked her pretty low, actually, after Go Wrong, if I'm being honest, because I do think she was saved at the final 11. I think if Neil wasn't medevac at the final 11, I do think she goes home. Also, I think she plays the Julia Tribal Council very poorly, but I think outside of that, she pretty much dominates that entire post-merge. I mean, that entire post-merge is all her, and I think that's something that's very impressive. I mean, her along with Sydney. I think together they blindside Debbie. I think Aubrey is the main factor in getting Ty to flip against Scott Pollard. Coming into that endgame, she has a very solid 3 of her, Ty, and Joe, where if that becomes the final 3, I do think there's a very good chance she wins the game. I do think Ty gets some votes. It's very much up in the air, but I do think there's at least a chance she wins the game. Again, she had pretty clear control over those last few votes. She was the deciding vote in getting rid of Jason. The Joe medevac severely hurt her game, where that took away one of her goats. Really, against Michelle, she really didn't have a shot. But I think it's also impressive that she was able to convince Ty to keep her at the final 4, something that was against his own interest at that point. So for me, again, I think there's a lot of positives about Aubrey's game, but also some pretty big negatives. So for me, she ranks here at number 9. Now, number 8 is a runner-up that I think people will probably be surprised that he's this high on the list. But I actually am very impressed by his game, and for me, that is Chase Rice. This is the thing. Chase Rice came 1 vote away from winning that season. And I think that's like completely mind-blowing on its own. But even if we look at his game, I think he played a very impressive game. Starts off the game in the center of the tribe, where he could have sided with the Shannon group, or he could have sided with the Brenda group. He obviously sides with the Brenda group, and to be fair, I do think that's partially due to emotional stuff, but he does end up in the majority there, and stays in the majority all the way up until the merge, sticking with the LaFleur people the entire way through. Coming to the merge, I think he has strong relationships with Holly and Jane, also with Brenda, also with Nayanka and Kelly Purple, to the point where Nayanka gives him her idol when she leaves the game, which is something that's also completely mind-blowing to me. But he does lose control. He does lose control at the Brenda vote. That's something he completely did not want to happen, and him losing Kelly Purple and Nayanka isn't particularly great for his game. But if we look at this game from Final 7 on, he is the dominant force there. He is the leader of that alliance between him, Holly, and Jane, which are able to get Sash on board. He executes the blind side of Jane at the final 6. And if it weren't for Fabio winning immunities, he gets to the end with Holly and Sash, 2 people who were not respected by the jury. I think it's very likely that Chase ends up winning that game. And I just find his game very impressive. That was just harmed by Fabio's immunity wins. And if it wasn't for that, I think Chase would have been a winner survivor, and a pretty strong one at that. Now, did he play emotionally at points? Yes, he did. Did he have some dumb moments on the island? Yes, he did. Did people look at him as a love-struck, like, sort of puppy? Yes, they did. But I do think if we look at just his game, I do think there's a lot of impressive things within it. So for me, he ranks here at number 8. Now at number 7, we have a runner-up that I know a lot of people are expecting to be like number 1 or number 2. But for me, at number 7, I have Russell Hantz from Samoa. I think he gets way too much credit for his control of the game like the final 10. Because if you really think about Russell Hantz's game, yes, I do think he's a major factor in the Marissa vote and also the Betsy vote. But when we get to the Ben vote, that's something that was, again, completely against his best interest, something he completely did not want to happen. And he makes his way through till the merge, but I don't think he was like a major dominant force during that. I think the votes were just playing out the way that they always would have. When we get to the merge, he has absolutely nothing to do with the Eric Cardona boot. He actually even wastes his idol during that tribal. Obviously, only to find another one the next tribal and play it successfully, but even then, he was at a point where he needed to play an idol successfully. That's not a great thing in my eyes, as without that idol, he would have been voted out. But from that point on, I do think he plays the game very well. At the final 10, he's able to convince Shambo to flip, causing a 5-5 tie, and also convince John Fincher to flip on the revote, giving them the majority. Immediately blindside John Fincher next round, very impressive. Able to keep control over the next 2 rounds by eliminating Dave and Monica. But this is where his game goes kind of off the rails. I do think at the Monica vote, the way he treats that, the way he gets so upset when she starts calling him out, I do think that's a big flaw in his game. I do think he's way too emotional of a player, really. Where I do think it's so easy to upset Russell Hantz. I think because that's obviously a massive flaw in his game there. I think that's the biggest example of his poor social play and his poor jury management. But then we get to the final 6, where because Brett wins immunities, he's forced to get rid of Shambo at 6 and Jason at 5 due to them not being as strong in challenges. And I feel like because of that ruins his game. I feel like if he were at the end with Jason and Shambo, I think he more than likely wins this season. But I think because he was at the end with Natalie White, someone that was a much more palatable option, I do think he obviously ends up losing. And obviously at the Final Four, he's forced to take out Brett when he doesn't win immunity, as Brett would have won the game probably unanimously. But I will also fault him for him giving Brett false hope, where he keeps on talking to Brett about, oh, I'm going to let you do fire making. It's like, why are you doing this? You're just losing a jury vote in this situation. So again, I think there are parts of the game he had 100% control in, but even in that control, I think he was misguided. I think he displayed some really poor social play and some poor jury management. But that being said, I do think his social game gets a lot of bashing in this season. But I think if you really look at it, he did have a lot of really strong connections on his original Fofoa tribe. So I don't really flaw him that much for his social game in this season. But overall, again, a very flawed game. He ranks here at number 7. Now moving on to the second to last tier of the video, and this is flawed dominance, which essentially is anyone that dominated the game but had some sort of flaw in the terms of not having control at certain points. The first of these runners up at number 6, I have Mike White from David vs. Goliath, and this might be a bit higher than people are expecting, but I think Mike White played a fantastic game as Survivor. I think if we really look at his game, he does start off the game in the minority, but by the time the tribal council that he goes to, he is part of the majority group. Post swap, he has a great relationship with Angelina. He has a great relationship with Nick Wilson, and that causes him to pretty much dominate that post swap section of the game. But then we get to the merge, where through his relationships with Alec and Allison, they're able to build that strike forced alliance that never comes to be, but I think that also just demonstrates that he is a major factor in the game. He is someone that is in the middle of things during that section of the game, even though he does end up being blindsided during the John Hennigan blindside and during the Dan blindside, which I think are knocks against him. But I think from the Carl blindside on, he dominates the game. From the Carl blindside, he's the major swing vote there. And then from that point on, he's very well integrated into the game, where he has Angelina, he has Nick, he has Kara, he has Allison. All people that want to take him far into the game. He's a major factor in getting rid of Christian and Gabby at the final 6. He is 100% the reason why David goes home. He is the deciding vote. He's the person that puts the votes on Davey. At the final 5, he gets rid of Allison, one of his bigger threats, and also one of his closest allies at that point. At the final 4, he wins fire making challenge against Kara. And at final tribal council, he does get respect from people like Kara, Allison, and Christian, and gets their jury votes over Nick. I think if Nick hadn't won those final 4 and final 5 immunity challenges and Nick had gone home at that point, I do think Mike White wins the game. If Mike White is at the end of the game with Kara and Angelina, Mike wins this season. He had a big chance of winning the game. He was very dominant at parts of the game, had so many great social relationships with so many people within the game. So for me, it's a very strong game. It ranks him at number 6. Now at number 5, we have a runner-up that, to be honest, I considered putting a bit lower, but I decided to stick with my guns. At number 5 here, I have Amanda Kimmel from Survivor China. And the reason I considered putting her lower is I remember a podcast with PG, where PG was talking about her perception of Amanda during China and how she always perceived Todd as the dominant force between the two. And because of that, I considered moving Amanda down to the second in command tier. But I thought about it a bit more, and I really do think Amanda deserves to be part of the dominant tier. So here she is at number 5. And again, the reason for that, I think she dominated the game along with Todd. I think throughout the entire season, her alliance with Todd controlled the game. I do think you have to give her some credit for the James blindside, where she's the one to bring it up at the final 7. Mind you, Todd brought it up at the final 9, so I mean, whatever. But I think you have to give her at least some credit there. I do think she's someone that could have won a jury vote had she been up against different people. I do think if it was her, Courtney, and Denise, I think there's a very good chance that she does win that game. Obviously, she had a very terrible final jury performance, but outside of that, I do think she had a very impressive game, being in the majority the entire time, pulling off certain moves. I find her game impressive. She lands here at number 5. Now at number 4, we have a runner-up that actually got no votes at the end, but I do still think he played a very impressive game. And for Survivor Token Cheens, we have Steven Fishback. And I've said this before, I would have voted for Steven over JT. I think Steven had a lot more control in that season than JT, where Steven was actually the initial person to create an alliance with Taj. He was someone that got to know about her idol initially, actually got to hold on to her idol. And it wasn't until towards the end of the pre-merge that they added JT to that group. Come merge time, it was JT and Steven that got the favor of people like a Debbie and a Coach and a Tyson. That allowed him to get through that Brendan vote, and through that, he eventually flipped the vote on Tyson, and obviously from that point on, dominated the game. You also have to give Steven a lot of credit for him being willing to pull the trigger on JT. If JT had not won the Final 3 immunity, and possibly even the Final 4 immunity, JT goes home. I do think that's something you have to give Steven credit for, is that if that had been the scenario, then JT doesn't get to the end and JT doesn't win. And more than likely, if Steven is at the end with either Taj or Aaron, I think he wins the game, especially over Aaron. I think he very clearly wins the game in that situation. So he came so close to winning the game, but didn't because of immunity wins. I do think that is a very impressive game for me. So despite the fact of him getting 0 votes at Final Tribal, he could have won the game from before that point. So for me, he ranks here at number 4. Now at number 3, very close to the end here, we have a runner-up that, to me, pretty much dominated the entire season. And for me, that is Coach from Survivor South Pacific. Now, Sophie and Albert have both talked about this after the season, that Coach was pretty much their figurehead, that they were really dominating the game, but Coach was just used as their figurehead, and I don't feel like that was really the case. If we look at the actual game itself, this is the thing. There are points where Coach very clearly has control. Coach is able to convince Cochran to flip over at the merge. I think that's a very impressive move. We have Coach voting out Michaela, which is something that was completely against Albert and Sophie's best interest. I think that's a very impressive move. We have Coach convincing Brandon to give his immunity necklace to Albert. That's a very impressive move. Coach, just in general, creating this cult around Christianity within this season, I think is very impressive. I think Coach played a massively dominant game of Survivor this season. However, the one thing I will fault him for is his jury management. I mean, his jury management was abysmal. I mean, the fact that he gives Ozzy hope at the Final 4 talking about, oh, I'm going to let you go to fire. That's terrible. Why are you doing that? The fact that he wouldn't admit to his game at Final Tribal Council is just terrible. He would have won the game if he did, but he wouldn't do it. So again, there's a lot of flaws within his game, but I do think if we just look at his game as a whole, it's just extremely dominant from beginning to end, and I just can't ignore it, even with some people saying that he was just a figurehead. So for me, I find Coach's game very impressive. He ranks here at number 3. And now here we are. We're at the final 2. And I think it should be pretty clear who those last 2 are. I mean, I think there's 2 major runners-up that I haven't talked about yet. But at number 2 here, the second best runner-up of Survivor to me is Dominic Abate from Survivor Ghost Island. And this is the thing about Dominic. Dominic played an extremely dominant game from the second swap on. I think we're taking in his early game. I think he made a lot of flaws there with his open distaste for Chris Noble, which caused the Navidi tribe to be split 5-5 initially, and who knows what would have happened there. He does get blindsided at the first tribal that he goes to, where Morgan goes home, and really only gets saved due to the fact that he had an idol. But from that point on, he dominates the game. He's able to reintegrate himself. He's able to get Laurel and Donathan to create an alliance with him and Wendell, which I think is very impressive. And he is the instigator of that alliance, which is why I do give more credit to Dominic at the end of the day than to Wendell. At the post-swap, he's able to throw the challenge to get rid of Bradley, someone who would have been a major threat to him in the endgame. Come merge, he's able to blindside Chris Noble with an idol in his pocket, keep the majority, stick with the majority, up until the final 7, taking out the old Malolo one by one, or people that opposed him in someone like a Desiree. Once he gets to the end game, he's able to take out people like a Chelsea and a Kellen, who were pretty big threats in the game at that point. At the final 6, he makes that massive move with the fake idol, which I think is an all-time great move. It's a shame that it wasn't respected by half of the jury. It's a shame that that actually lost him jury votes, especially from someone like a Kellen. But it does tarnish his relationship with the jury, which does actually end up costing him the game. Obviously, he wins final immunity, and if this had been a normal season where no fire-making challenge was involved, there is a chance that Wendell goes home there. Not an enormous chance. I do think Laurel has said after the fact that she would have caused a tie, as at that point she thought the best chance for her to win was to be against both Wendell and Dominic. But if he was able to get to the end against anyone other than Wendell, he easily sweeps the jury. He wins the game almost unanimously. Like, there's no other person that even comes close to him than Wendell. And even with Wendell, he had 5 locked jury votes coming into that final tribal council, where he just needed one more to get the win, and he just couldn't get that one other jury vote. I find his game super impressive. Just, again, he's the closest any of these runners-up have come to winning the game. He literally had a tied vote. But again, he didn't have control in that earlier section of the game, which is the main reason he is behind my number one runner-up of all time. Number one runner-up of all time. I think it's pretty clear, right, at this point. It's Boston Rob from Survivor All-Stars. I mean, Boston Rob, I think, is the only runner-up that had complete control from beginning to end and still had a chance of winning the game. This is the thing. Boston Rob, right away, asserted dominance over his tribe. Had, obviously, the relationship with Amber. Had alliance with Big Tom. Had alliance with Rob Cesternino. Had alliance with Alicia. Didn't really have an alliance with Sue, but that didn't really matter. Either way, dominated the beginning of the game, blindsided Rob Cesternino, and when Rupert and Jenna joined their tribe, he was right away able to create a 4-person alliance between Rupert and Jenna and him and Amber, which end up running the entire game. At the swap, where Amber gets swapped to the other tribe, he's able to make that deal with Lex, which is a very impressive move. Getting Lex to keep Amber into the game, only for him to blindside Lex at the first vote after the merge. And after that, again, has complete control over the rest of the game. Takes out Kathy, Alicia, Cheyenne with no real trouble. At the final 5, where there started to be some sort of insurgents against him from Big Tom, he's able to nip that in the bud, take out Big Tom. At the final 4, convinces Jenna to vote out Rupert. And then at the final 3, was in a situation where both Amber and Jenna were going to take him to the end. Mind you, he wins immunity anyway and takes Amber to the end, where he loses in a 4-3 vote. Comes 1 vote away from winning the game. Comes 1 misconception away from winning the game, as Cheyenne was under this idea that Amber was controlling the entire game and that Boston Rob was a figurehead, which we know from watching the season simply wasn't the case. And the reason why I even have him in higher regard is I do think Boston Rob wins against Jenna. Mind you, that also means that he made the wrong decision at the final 3, but to him it didn't really matter at that point. I mean, if him or Amber won, it was a win either way. But I think him against Jenna, if we go through the votes, I think Lex obviously votes for Jenna. I think Kathy votes for Boston Rob. I think that's the big... Kathy is the swing vote in this situation, where I think Kathy decides the winner. But I do think she goes for Boston Rob, as she did against Amber. Then again, she hated Amber. So again, it's a complicated situation there. But let's just say she goes for Boston Rob. Yeah, Alicia goes for Jenna. Cheyenne is a major factor here. Cheyenne hated Jenna's guts. She goes for Boston Rob. We have Big Tom goes for Jenna. Rupert goes for Boston Rob due to the agreement that they made earlier on in the season. And we have Amber, who more than likely goes for Boston Rob. Again, in this situation, obviously Jenna would have had to win final immunity, but I think if Jenna had won final immunity, Boston Rob wins this season 4-3. And that's something that puts him over the edge for me, puts him as very clearly the number 1 runner-up of Survivor up to this point. And really, actually, I didn't even mention this, that he's the only runner-up in the complete dominance tier. So there we go. That is every runner-up. 63 players ranked. Oh my god, this video took way too long to record, but we did it. So I'd like to thank everyone that watched this entire video. Thank you for sticking with my channel. I mean, the channel is 1 year old at this point, which is really weird to think about. Obviously, I will continue to be making videos in the future, more about Winners at War, more about every other future Survivor Big Brother season. I still plan on doing a global winner and season ranking for Survivor sometime down the road. And also more videos on other stuff that no one really cares about, but I like making videos on, like games and movies and TV shows and all that sort of stuff. But that's the video. That is my ranking of the runners-up. Thank you for watching.